Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. And on the floor of the Senate in a quorum call, we're expecting judicial nomination debate on 2 judicial nominations in about half an hour, and votes on those nominations at 5:30. Also happening on the Hill, President Obama officials are meeting with lawmakers about the situation in Syria and briefing and making the case for the president's wanting to have military strikes there. The Obama administration blames the Syrian government for the chemical weapons attacks that happened last month that killed 1,400 people. And we also heard from the White House earlier today. We'll take a look at the last about 20 minutes of the White House briefing. We'll come back to the floor of the Senate if another lawmaker takes the floor.
Stockpiles. These things now appear to be merging in public. Is that an alternative the administration would support, or would it prefer the Senate only deal with the authorization before it and consider no other matters?
Well, I would refer to specific timetables in the Senate to the Senate Majority Leader's office. What we are focused on is making the substantive case to lawmakers as well as to the public, and we're engaged in a broad effort from the President on down to do that, about what happened on August 21st, the incontrovertible fact that weapons were used that night, chemical weapons were used that night to horrifying effect, and the fact that beyond a reasonable doubt the Assad regime was responsible for the use of chemical weapons on that night, and that we need to, as a matter of our own national security interest, take action with the support of many nations around the world and with the support of Congress, and that's why we're making the case.
One last thing. To the degree you're aware of it, Charlie Rose had this interview with Assad. Do you have any comment on some of the many things that Assad said about his regime, about his chemical weapons, about other elements of possible repercussions if there are attacks? Is the President made aware, briefed on the contents? Because it's kind of a, we haven't heard from Assad in this kind of extensive format. I wonder if you had any overall assessments, or to the degree the President's been briefed.
Well, the President obviously is being briefed regularly on situations with regard, with matters with regard to the situation in Syria, and I don't know specifically what he was briefed on when it came to the Assad interview, but I'm very confident he's aware of it. Well, what Tony said in terms of the threat of repercussions is what I will echo, which is that we obviously assess what kind of reactions or actions might be taken in response to the kind of action we're contemplating. I think Tony's assessment that we do not believe it would be that the Assad regime would view it as in their interest to engage in a war with the United States, or and I think that's true there too. We do not, but we will take every precaution necessary. We are very confident that we are more than capable of responding to or handling any reaction to that action. Carol.
Last Friday, Samantha Power said that the administration had exhausted all alternatives to military force in regards to Syria. Does the White House believe that the administration has exhausted all alternatives to military force?
We have spent the 2 years that there has been a civil war in Assad, engaging the international community, trying to get the United Nations Security Council to act and hold Assad accountable. Russia and China have blocked those efforts. We have worked in a concerted way with the opposition and with many partners around the world in providing support to the moderate opposition, as well as significant humanitarian relief to the Syrian people who have been so horribly affected by this conflict. When it comes to the use of chemical weapons, we have made clear again and again to the Assad regime, from the President on down, that there would be consequences, and there must be consequences to the use of chemical weapons. And that was deliberate, because it was, in our view, it would be a terrible thing, a terrible precedent if Assad were to use those weapons in this conflict. Now he has done so, and he has done so on a massive scale with all the horror as a result that we've seen. Now that is why we are where we are, and that is why the President has been making this case internationally and why he's been making this case domestically. We will obviously, in response to what we've talked about here, assess proposals put forward by the Russians, assess other proposals, but the fact is Assad used these weapons against his own people, murdering more than 1,400, including more than 400 children. And if everyone acknowledges that that's the case, as every lawmaker who's had this briefing has acknowledged is the case, then the question only becomes, should there be consequences for that? And that is the question we're asking every lawmaker as they contemplate this vote.
The answer is no, you haven't exhausted all of your...
I'm not sure. I mean, this is...
if you're reviewing the Russian proposal, then...
Well, when she said that, the Russian proposal hadn't been proffered. I think it was proffered in the last couple of hours.
I'm asking if that changed. Is your view right now, the White House's view, that you have exhausted all other options aside from military force, or you haven't?
Well, I think we've answered this question because there is now, this new statement by the Russians, the foreign minister, as well as a response by the Syrian foreign minister, and we are going to study it and engage with the Russians and others on it.
Mr. President, what is
The Senate's in a quorum call.
asking unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated?
Without objection.
Mr. President, I come to the floor at this time to talk about the urgent issue before the Senate and before the country. We come to this chamber, as we have many times before, to make one of the most difficult decisions we are tasked to make, which is the authorization of the use of American military power, this time in Syria, to respond to the horrific attack, including the use of chemical weapons of August 21st that took the lives of over 1,429 Syrians, including at least 426 children. The world is watching, and America is waiting to see what we do in this chamber in response to the threat the world faces from those who cross the lines of human decency and use chemical weapons against anyone, anywhere in the world. Now, the images of that August 21st attack are sickening, and in my view, the world cannot ignore the inhumanity and horror of what Bashar al-Assad did. Now, as I've said many times before as a member of Congress, I do not take the responsibility to authorize military force lightly or make such decisions easily. I voted against the war in Iraq when every public poll said it was popular to vote for the war. I have been a strong advocate of a more robust drawdown in Afghanistan. But today, I urge my colleagues to support this tightly crafted, clearly focused resolution to give the President authorization to use military force in the face of this horrific crime against humanity. Now, yes, there are clearly risks to any actions we authorize, but the consequences of inaction, the consequences of standing down from fully upholding the norms of international behavior are greater and graver still. Future humanitarian disaster in Syria, regional instability, loss of American credibility around the world, and embolden Iran and North Korea, and the disintegration of international law. This vote will be one of the most difficult any of us will be asked to make. But the American people expect us to make those hard decisions and to take hard votes. They expect us to put aside political differences and personal ideologies, to forget partisanship and preconceptions, to even not necessarily follow where the wind is blowing. This is a moment, I believe, for profiles in courage, a moment for each of us to do what we know is right, based on what we know is the best interests of the United States, regardless of what the political pundits will say. To be clear, the authorization Senator Corker and I are introducing, and Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that I be listed as a sponsor and Senator Corker be listed as the co-sponsor of the resolution.
Without objection.
The authorization we are introducing is for focused action with a clear understanding that American troops will not be on the ground in combat. We've worked closely together to put politics aside, weigh the facts, search our consciences, and pass a resolution in committee that we believe is in the national security interests of the American people. I've said before and will say again, this is not a declaration of war, but a declaration of our values. And I want to thank Senator Corker, the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who's been a close partner in helping to tailor and focus the language of this resolution so it reflects the will of the committee, the interests of the American people, and at the same time gives the President the authority he needs to respond to serious use of chemical weapons against its own people. Now, what do we know? Because I see, as I was back home in New Jersey, listening to citizens who came up to me concerned, and I think it's important to say, what do we know? What we know is clear, notwithstanding Assad's interviews and his denials. According to the declassified intelligence assessment, we know with high confidence that the Syrian government carried out a chemical weapons attack in the Damascus suburbs on August the 21st. We know that the buck stops with Assad, his interview denials aside. We know that he controls the regime's stockpiles of chemical agents, including mustard, sarin, and VX gas, and has thousands of munitions capable of delivering them, again, under his control. It is inconceivable and defies all logic that he would not know about the preparations and deployment of these horrific weapons. We know that personnel involved in this program are carefully vetted to ensure loyalty to the regime and the security of the program. We know that chemical weapons personnel from the Syrian Scientific Studies and Research Center, which is a subordinate of the regime's Ministry of Defense, were operating in the Damascus suburbs of Adra from Sunday, August the 18th until early in the morning of Wednesday, August 21st, near an area that the regime uses to mix chemical weapons, including sarin. And human intelligence, as well as signal and geospatial intelligence, have shown regime activity in the preparations of chemicals prior to the attack, including the distribution and use of gas masks. And we also know that where in fact the attacks took place from was from those areas that the regime and Assad controlled into those suburbs of Damascus that rebels were fighting. And we know that the rebels do not have the wherewithal to have the type of artillery that ultimately delivered these chemical weapons, nor do they have the access to these chemical weapons. Now, some may still, in the face of all of those facts, be skeptical about Assad's involvement. But clearly the buck stops with Assad when it comes to the use of these weapons. Now, some may also be skeptical that we have not done enough to allow diplomacy to work. But the fact is, we have tried diplomacy. We have gone to the United Nations on many occasions, and it has only bought Assad more time. Notwithstanding Russia's belated offer today to take action, which, by the way, may only be on the table specifically because of the threat of the use of force, let's not forget it has been their intransigence that brought us to this point in the first place. The fact is, on August 28th, a week after the attack, Russia blocked a United Nations Security Council resolution that called, quote, for all necessary measures to be taken, and simply called for any state that used chemical weapons to be held accountable. The Russians could not even accept a resolution that simply said that any state that uses chemical weapons should be held accountable. On the day of the attack, August 21st, Russia blocked a Security Council press statement, a simple press statement, expressing concern that chemical weapons might have been used. They couldn't support an expression of concern. On August 6, Russia blocked another press statement welcoming the news that a UN investigations team would investigate these sites and calling for their full and unfettered access to those sites. Russia has also vetoed a Security Council resolution enshrining the June 30th Geneva communique brokered by Kofi Annan, vetoed a resolution calling for an end to violence in Syria, vetoed a draft resolution endorsing the Arab League's plan of action that would have condemned human rights violations. They blocked a press statement calling for humanitarian access to the besieged city of Homs, and one calling for Syrian authorities to provide the United Nations with humanitarian access. All of these actions that simply would have put the UN in a position to observe and possibly to help, they blocked. And over the course of the conflict in Syria, the United States government, specifically the State Department, has met consistently with its close allies and partners, as well as with Syria's neighbors, to help prepare the region to detect, prevent, and respond to the potential use or proliferation of chemical weapons. I think, as Ambassador Power acknowledged in her remarks at the Center for American Progress on September the 6th, the United States has regularly engaged with the Russians, and the Iranians even, to attempt to get them to use their influence to stop the Assad regime from using chemical weapons. And that very same day, on September 6th, the United States and 10 other countries issued a joint statement condemning the Assad regime's use of chemical weapons. Australia, Canada, France, Italy, Japan, the Republic of Korea, Saudi Arabia, Spain, Turkey, and Great Britain. Since then, 14 other nations have also signed on to that statement. Albania, Croatia, Denmark, Estonia, Germany, Honduras, Hungary, Kosovo, Latvia, Lithuania, Morocco, Qatar, Romania, and the United Arab Emirates. It's only the threat by the President and this resolution that would drive both Russia and Syria to the possibility of a negotiating table. The facts are clear. We have tried diplomacy. Let us understand that this action is not a choice of force or diplomacy. It's about both. It's about enforcing international norms that will, at the end of the day, leverage necessary UN action and help bring about a political solution. For those who want to see UN Security Council action, those who want to push Syria to sign a chemical weapons agreement and give up their weapons, this resolution is the best path to getting there. Now, let me finally say to my colleagues who believe that the authorization of the use of military force will be nothing more than, I've heard this phrase several times, than a pinprick. This resolution will have clear and verifiable consequences. It will help keep these weapons in check, degrade Assad's ability to deploy them, and I believe prevent the proliferation of chemical weapons and their use by others in the world. The resolution will have clear consequences, but at the same time it's also not open-ended. It appropriately narrows the scope, duration, and breadth of the authority granted to meet congressional concerns and the concerns of the American people. It is tightly tailored to give the President necessary and appropriate authority to use military force to respond to the use of weapons of mass destruction in Syria, protect the national security interests of the United States, our allies and partners, and degrade Syria's capacity to use the weapons in the future. It has a requirement for determination that the use of military force is necessary, that appropriate diplomatic and other peaceful means to prevent the deployment and use of chemical weapons by Syria have been used, and that the United States has both a specific military plan to achieve the goal of responding to the use of weapons of mass destruction by the Syrian government, and that the use of military force is consistent with broader goals of U.S. strategy towards Syria, including achieving a negotiated settlement to the conflict, and a limitation that specifies that the resolution does not does not authorize the use of United States armed forces on the ground in Syria for the purposes of combat operations, assuring that there will be no boots on the ground. And that authorization would end after 60 days, with the President having the ability to request and certify for another 30 days, and Congress having an opportunity, if it disagreed, to pass a resolution of disapproval. It provides for an integrated United States government strategy for Syria, including a comprehensive review of current and planned U.S. diplomatic, political, economic, and military policy towards Syria, and a status report to the Congress. Now, let me say in conclusion, history has taught us harsh lessons when it comes to the use of chemical weapons. The images we've seen of children lying on the floor on August 21st were not the first images the world has ever seen of the horrors of chemical attacks. We saw them over 100 years ago, nearly 100 years ago in World War I. If we do not learn from and live by the lessons of the past, if we fail the test of history, then we're destined and doomed to repeat it. If we allow the use and proliferation of chemical weapons, despite the world's horror at the gruesome and horrific use of those that were used at the beginning of the last century, then we risk the same horrors again in this century. Let's not fail the test of history. Let us say to the world that we cannot allow anyone to use chemical weapons again, that we can never allow such weapons to fall in the hands of stateless actors and terrorists who would unleash them against America or American interests around the world. So for all of those reasons, and I want to make sure that the ranking member gets time, I'll ask unanimous consent that my full statement be entered into the record. I believe this is in the national security interest of the United States, and I passionately urge my colleagues to think about the consequences of inaction. With that, I'd be happy to yield to the ranking member.
Without objection, the Senator's full statement will be put into the record, and the Senator from Tennessee is recognized.
Mr. President, I'd like to thank the Chairman for his comments, for his historical analysis of what has occurred, and his comments regarding our ability to work together on this. I do want to reiterate a point that the Chairman made partially through his comments. I don't think any of us know at this time whether the offers today that have been made from Russia and the responses that have been given from Syria, I don't think we have any idea whether there's credibility at present. What I do know is there would be absolutely zero conversation about that had our committee not passed an authorization out on a 10-7 vote, and if we were not taking this up this week. So I want to commend the Chairman for his leadership on this issue. I've enjoyed working with him on this issue. I've enjoyed working with him on all the issues relative to Syria. And all the other things that we've done in a bipartisan way. And I think it's been the tradition, I know it's been the tradition of this body, to, when it comes to issues beyond our shores line, to set aside partisanship, as was mentioned a moment ago, and do things that are in the best interest of our nation. There's nothing more important that each member of this body will take up than the authorization for the use of military force. And I sensed it the other day in our committee. I've sensed it with those who I've talked to since. Each member is looking at this with a sense of humility and soberness, and I really believe that it's up to each member to make this decision. I will say that the issues of Syria are something that I'm familiar with. I've traveled to the region, as I know the Chairman and many others have. I've traveled 3 times this year. Wrote an op-ed in the New York Times in April regarding what our response to Syria should be. Our committee thankfully passed out on a 15-3 vote on May the 21st with the Chairman's leadership the Syria Transition Support Act. And this was to support the vetted moderate opposition and require the administration to develop a comprehensive strategy. I know that members of this body know that I support this authorization. I helped write it with the Chairman. I am very comfortable with my position in supporting this and believe that what we've done with this authorization we've done in the right and correct way. I will say that I've been very dismayed at the administration's lack of response after stating publicly that they were going to support the vetted moderate opposition in certain ways. I've been very frustrated at the response and the lack of support in that way. I was just in the areas I mentioned 3 weeks ago. I visited the same refugee camps in Turkey on the Syrian border and in Jordan on the Syrian border. I saw some of the same refugees that I saw there less than a year ago, and candidly am dismayed that we have not supported the vetted opposition in a better way. And I know that we have urged out of our committee that we have a much more comprehensive strategy. I wish that bill had come to the floor. I wish the Senate had taken action. But candidly, I also am dismayed that this administration has not taken action to do something in a more comprehensive way. No question the introduction of chemical weapons has changed the dynamic tremendously. I think the chairman was very articulate in explaining why this is important. But I want to say to everybody in this body, to me, an equally important issue for our nation is the credibility of the United States of America. I believe that our president, whether you support him or not, whether you like him or not, I believe the president spoke for our nation when he established a red line some months ago regarding the use of chemical weapons. And I believe that it is very important for our nation's credibility in the region and in the world that we have an appropriate response when we have a dictator like Assad take the actions that he has taken against international norms the way that he has, but especially when the commander-in-chief of our nation has spoken the way that he has about this issue. So to me, this is twofold. It certainly is about the international norms that have been spoken to eloquently by many, but to me it's also an issue of this nation's credibility, of the response as people are looking on to what we're going to do, and that's why I support this authorization. I do want to go back over a couple of points that the chairman referred to relative to the substance of the authorization. I think most people know the White House sent over an authorization that to me was very broad. It did not define what we were going to do in a specific way. I know the chairman just talked about the fact that this authorization is tailored, it's specific. And let me just go over again what specifically this authorization does. Its specific purposes only to respond to the use of weapons of mass destruction, to dissuade future use, degrade ability, and to prevent transfer. No boots on the ground for combat operations. I know there have been some discussions about that in our committee. Very emphatically, this authorization eliminates and keeps any boots on the ground for combat operations from occurring. This has a time limit of 60 days with a 30-day extension, which Congress can disapprove. It is geographically limited to Syria only, which the original authorization was not. It's against legitimate military targets only, which, again, the original authorization was not. And there are a series of determinations that the President has to make prior to taking action with this authorization, including that it's in the core national interests of the U.S. and that he has a military plan to achieve the objectives. In addition, this authorization requires a comprehensive strategy for a negotiated end to this conflict. I want to refer to something else the chairman mentioned, and that is the type of activity. I know there's been numbers of editorial comments in papers and publications all around the country referring to this as a pinprick. There have been other concerns by members of this body as to the duration of this effort and how long it will be. I've had the privilege, and because of the position that I serve on the Foreign Relations Committee, to be involved in multiple phone calls, personal meetings, one last night that lasted at great length with the President and Vice President. And I want to say to every person in this body, I have no belief whatsoever that if military action is taken, it's going to be a pinprick. None. The American military has incredible ability to deal with issues in a forceful way, but also do so in a very short time frame. I really do believe, based on the many meetings that we've had both with military and civilian leadership, I really do believe that to characterize what's proposed as a pinprick or to characterize what is proposed as inserting ourselves into a long-term civil war, I think both of those characterizations are wrong. Obviously, one of the dilemmas that people here deal with is that we write policy, and then it's up to the administration to carry that out. And no question, none of us will be involved in the direct carrying out. But it's my firm belief that there's not a thread of thinking by the administration that what they're considering is a pinprick. And on the other hand, I have not a thread of thought that they're also considering doing something that is going to involve us in a long-term civil war. Obviously, conflicts like this are complex. In closing, let me say this. Each senator has to make their own decision. This is one of those things where lobbying is not something that's going to make senators' minds up. I think each senator has to, in their own mind and heart, make their own mind up. What I can say is that we're going to have an open process. I know we've talked about the process going forward. I believe that we will have, I hope that senators will keep their amendments germane. I hope we have a sober debate about an issue that is the most important type of decision that any senator will make. It's important, I'm thrilled, by the way, that the President decided to come to Congress for an authorization. I know a lot of people have made lots of comments regarding that. Candidly, I am glad the President has come to us for this debate, and it is my hope that the Senate, after hearing the facts and after having a thoughtful debate, will approve this authorization for the use of military force. I couldn't agree more with the Chairman that if people want to see a diplomatic solution, which is the only way we're going to end this conflict, I do not think this conflict ends militarily. I believe that we've learned a lot from the last two episodes that we've been through, and I believe that it's important for us, though, to have this authorization because I believe it is the only thing at this point, the fact that we've passed it out of committee, the fact that it's on the floor, that might possibly lead to a diplomatic settlement. I also believe, though, that it's time for the President to lead. I know there have been a lot of statements over the last week, and the President's had multiple audiences to which to speak. And I understand that. And I understand that reports out of these meetings can come out in many ways not to be accurate. I know the President is coming to the Hill tomorrow. I know he'll be making a major speech to the United States, the citizens of our country tomorrow night. I know that many of them have lives where they get up, all of them, most of them, get up in the mornings, they go to work, they raise their families, and they haven't had the opportunity to spend as much time on these issues. And that's why we're elected to do this. But I will say this, it is very important for the President of the United States to come to Congress and the President of the United States to make his case to the American people. He is asking for this authorization. I believe that it is important for us to give him this authorization, and I want to thank again the Chairman for working with us to make sure that we've narrowed this authorization in such a way that I think it meets the test and what the American people and what all of us want to see happen. But I really do believe that now it's up to the President over the next several days and this week to make his case to the American people as to why the Senate, the United States Senate, should give him this authorization for the use of military force, which I hope we will do. Mr. President, I thank you for the time, and I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations, which the clerk will report.
Nominations, the Judiciary. Valerie E. Caproni of the District of Columbia to be United States District Judge for the Southern District of New York. Vernon S. Broderick of New York to be United States District Judge for the Southern District of New York.
Under the previous order, there will be 30 minutes for debate equally divided in the usual form.
President.
Senator from New Jersey.
I asked at all time during this debate on the executive calendar be equally divided on both sides, and that any quorum call that is called be equally divided as well in terms of charging the time.
Without objection.
Mr. President, in view of the fact that I don't see any members at this point, I observe the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President,
The senator from New York.
I ask unanimous consent to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
Today I rise to urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support Valerie Caproni for U.S. District Judge for New York's Southern District. I know Ms. Caproni to be a woman with impeccable credentials, incredible intellect, and the kind of fair-minded judgment we need on the federal bench. Ms. Caproni today serves as Vice President and General Counsel for Northrop Grumman Corporation, where she leads all aspects of litigation. Ms. Caproni joined Northrop Grumman from her former position as General Counsel to the FBI, a position that Director Robert Mueller personally asked Ms. Caproni to serve in the wake of the horrific attacks of September 11. Ms. Caproni knows full well the task at hand for the FBI is never easy, from protecting America from terror and other attacks, balanced with defending our civil liberties and civil rights. But as she put it, quote, they always strive to do the right thing and to maintain as a lodestar fealty to the Constitution and the rule of law. That's what Ms. Caproni believes to her very core. Ms. Caproni also served in the Securities and Exchange Commission, where she enforced regulatory programs in the 9-state Pacific region. She and her staff strengthened cooperation between the SEC and the U.S. Attorney's Office to crack down on financial fraud. Ms. Caproni also served as Chief of the Criminal Division for the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York and in private practice at several top firms. Through her breadth of experience, her talent, her intellect, and her strong character, I know Ms. Caproni would be an outstanding jurist. I strongly believe this country needs more women like her serving in the federal judiciary, an institution that I believe needs more exceptional women. I have no doubt that having Ms. Caproni serve in the federal judiciary will bring us closer to achieving that goal of a federal judiciary that reflects our nation. I was honored to recommend her for this position, and I urge all my colleagues to vote in support of her confirmation. I also urge my colleagues to vote in favor of another outstanding New Yorker, Vernon Broderick, also to be a U.S. District Judge for the Southern District of New York. Mr. Broderick served as an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, where he helped protect New Yorkers by prosecuting cases involving organized crime, international narcotics trafficking, and violent crimes. I urge the Senate to vote in full support of Mr. Broderick's nomination. Thank you, Mr. President, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
And in a quorum call here on the Senate floor, expecting a vote that's been scheduled for a few minutes from now, 5:30 Eastern Time, on judicial nominations. And the Obama administration is briefing members of Congress today throughout the afternoon on the situation in Syria with intelligence that the administration has. And we have our C-SPAN cameras set up outside those meeting rooms. We've been waiting for comments as lawmakers exit the closed meetings and pass by. We're going to put all of those up at cspan.org as they're made available. I also want to let you know that earlier today, Majority Leader Harry Reid spoke from the floor of the Senate. He said he blames the Syrian government for using chemical weapons on its own people. He called it a clear violation of human decency. Again, some of those briefings from outside the meeting rooms will be at our website, cspan.org.
Mr. President.
Senator from